Hey, it's Derek Depker here with Richard Haight. And Richard is someone who has been a very successful author in the personal transformation space and the space of meditation, spirituality. And what I'm really excited about sharing with you today is, you'll hear from him the story, especially we were just talking about this. Richard's first book, The Unbound Soul, is a memoir that's done incredibly well. And so when it comes to if you have a memoir or like how do you tell your personal story in a way that's going to be compelling to readers, especially if they don't know you, that's something that we're going to dive into. So Richard, glad to have you here.
Thank you, Derek. Great to be here. It's good to see you.
Yeah, good to connect with you again. We've been, contacting, for those listening, we've been back and forth. Richard's been on my email list for a while. We've shared ideas with each other. And I'm curious, Richard, can you tell us a little bit about your background, which is not originally in writing, and what your background is, then how you got into writing books?
Yes, so my background is in the martial arts. I spent 15 years living in Japan, studying sword, jiu-jitsu, staff, with an old samurai kind of teacher. He was not actually samurai, of course, that's long gone, but that was his heritage. Just an amazing martial artist. And from that experience, there was just so much wisdom, so much that I realized in an embodied way that I wanted to be able to express to others. Things that I couldn't find. It's not that I couldn't find some of these elements in other spirituality books. I couldn't find the embodiment of it or the depth of it, how it can be used under pressure. So, for example, it's very easy to meditate when you're in an idealistic situation. You create a nice warm room, put on some soothing music, you turn down the lights and tell everybody to buzz off for the half hour or whatever, and then we can get centered. Actually, most people can't do that either. But that's sort of the vision of meditation. But what I learned through the training in Japan was that you need to be centered, clear, and awareness broadly extended in all directions under the pressure of your teacher's sword, surrounded by 5, 6, 10 different people. That's what the real meditation is about. And if you can do that, it's easy to meditate on the mat. It's easy to meditate in daily life. It's easy to stay calm and clear and helpful under pressure, under stress. And it can apply to everything in our daily life. Meditation need not be something that's set aside 15 minutes a day kind of deal, right? And so that was sort of the original intention for writing. There was, when I was young, I never planned to be a writer. Apparently, my best friend reminded or told me that his mother. When I was like 6, I told his mother I was going to write a story about our childhood. So I couldn't read or write at that time. I had a learning disorder. And I didn't really learn to read or write until I was about 15, 16 years old. And so I didn't consciously remember ever telling her that, and I had no intention. But after I got back from Japan and I just saw really how valuable what it was that I had discovered and had been taught in Japan was. And I started teaching seminars, just local people around my house. After the first seminar, I realized I needed to write. I needed to write a book, and it was just as clear as day, what it needed to be about. I could see the layout of it. It wasn't like a thought out deal. And I just started writing, and it took about 3 months, the first book. I was just writing all day long. And it took about 3 months, and then sent it to my editor. I sent it to an editor, someone that had been recommended. I worked for a book publisher when I was a young man. As it turns out, I was in the warehouse. The owner of that publishing house and his brother was the president. He and I would spar martial arts. He was like 6'5", 240 or 230. And maybe I was probably 155 soaking wet, but he really enjoyed it. I had a high skill level, so he really enjoyed sparring with me. We would get rough and ready with each other. But when I wrote the book, I contacted him and asked him, how do I get this published? And basically he took me under his wing and said, you're going to have to self-publish this, and here's a great editor. If I could recommend to anybody who's done all our books, this is the guy you want to contact. And so I contacted that guy, a man named Ed Austin Hall, for anybody who's looking for a great editor. And he asked me to send him a sample, and he edited, I don't know, the first chapter or something like that. He called me back and he said, as far as the editing process, he's going to be honest with me, it's a mess. It's going to be a lot of work, but that he was really inspired and really wanted to work on it. And so he actually gave me a good rate. And then he took me under his wing. Actually, he would call me after he got so far through the book and say, okay, this is the things you need to change in your writing to make your writing better. And he mentored me, actually. So it was really a beautiful experience for me. And a lot of the changes were very easy to understand and digest and just to put them into practice. And that sped up my writing after that tremendously. It also, interestingly enough, changes the way you think when you change your language, because the way you think is based on language. So that's basically what happened. And now in the Unbound Soul, what my editor pointed out and what I noticed is that each chapter has succinct, has some important principle, but that from that principle, really an entire book ought to be written, right? From each chapter, there really ought to be an entire, to do it justice, it needs more filling out ultimately. And so the Unbound Soul kind of becomes the template or the foundation of my writing, right? And then, so the second book was Experience, which is based off of the, chapter 11 or something of the Unbound Soul, which is a meditation that I teach there. And it expands that meditation into a spiritual direction. People that are interested in spiritual awakening and, that sort of thing. And then the third book was Psychedelics, how to make the maximal use of psychedelics, and especially not just the pleasant trips, but the bad trips, the ones that you don't want to see, because a lot of times that content is the unconscious stuff that you haven't dealt with coming up. And so it's a really opportunity to dive into that and get the most out of that experience if you can shift the way you view it. It's attitude, and awareness. And then the last book is meditation again, but this time for people that are not necessarily interested in spiritual awakening. They're just interested in awareness. They're interested in improving the quality of their life, period. And this last one is called The Warrior's Meditation. And it's just taken off. It was published in January 1st, if I recall. And the launch was in the beginning of February. And it reached, I don't know, maybe say 800 on Amazon, and then trickled down to about 4,000 and just sort of rested at 4,000 and climbed to 2,000. Hung there for, I don't know, a couple of weeks, and now it's been climbing again. Now it's somewhere around 900, and the physical book's around 3,000. So I've done far better than any other book that I've published by far. And it's just taking that very core type of meditation that really is a warrior's type meditation. It's a meditation meant to be practical, but it's through some research I found out it's not different than the type of the natural meditation. There is the type of meditation that comes from religion, or we say renunciation of the world, and this is a meditation where you kind of pull into yourself, right? And there's a type of meditation that was used. It's just not even used. It was just natural. Kids would go out and they were told to go, for tribal people, First Nations people, you go out and you sit in your sit spot twice a day, in the morning for sunrise and the afternoon for sunset. And when you're there, you do this particular kind of, it's a naturally emergent meditation fundamentally. And that's very close to what I teach. It's just formulated to get us to that place that we would naturally get if we sat in the forest for 4 days. So that's sort of been my path so far. I wonder if I answered your question.
Yeah, that's a very there's a lot that's inspiring in your story, and I want to point a few things out for anyone.
Before you go, I want to say something to your audience, if that's all right with you. I wanted to credit you. So Derek Depker's got a course which I joined, and his course, I had no idea. I mean, the book was what it was. It was written. It was apparently good enough quality. but the cover was a disaster. And I had no idea how to promote it. And so I believe in one of Derek's live sessions, I tossed my book up and asked for feedback, and got a lot of great feedback, and then redid the cover as a result. And then, of course, learned how to use the marketing tools that are available through Amazon and book blogs and things like that through his program. And that's really where my book started selling. So the content was there, but the presentation was not. And I believe I also may have refined my book description as a result of comments that you made. So I would have wanted to, thank you for that. It was extremely helpful.
No, I appreciate it. Yeah. And we'll dive here into some of the practical things for, what's worked for your books and the marketing. And before we get into that, I want to pull out a few great lessons from your story. Because if a person just listens to the story and they go, oh, okay, that's cool, that's Richard's story, well, how does this apply to just about every author? And there's a couple things, especially there's principles that are going to be more nonfiction. There's principles that are going to be universal. One of the things that's more universal is that you didn't wait until you had everything all figured out. You knew you had a story inside of you, your story, your message. You felt compelled to share this. And how many people let things like, well, I have a learning disorder, so I can't do it. Oh, I didn't learn to read or write until I was 15 or 16. Didn't, oh, well, if I write this, it's not going to, I don't know how to structure everything the perfect way. Or, what do I include in this book? What becomes a separate, and they think about it so much. And what you did is, it's almost like when you're called to something, you share it, and then you figure out, okay, this editor can help me. Okay. Then you ask, okay, how do I get this published? You didn't wait until everything was figured out. You just took the next step that you knew how to take, and then the next door opens. And then you take the next step, and the next door opens. So I want to point that out and acknowledge you for that, because that is sometime, and yes, there's a time to plan ahead and figure things out. But I mean, you didn't need to know how to edit it perfectly. You know that there's editors out there, right? And it's one of the things I see with some authors is they just won't take that next step, because I've heard the metaphor or analogy is, it's like sitting at a stoplight, and the light's green, but you're not going because 4 lights down, it's a red light. And it's like, no, you can move forward through this one. You'll figure out the next step. So that's something that you did. And I could also sense that you have the feeling of, I have something, right? That not everyone knows. And it might seem weird. It's like, well, it's meditation. A lot of people talk about meditation. A lot of people, it's been taught for thousands of years. There's all kinds of books on it and things. And yet you identified, you have your own story and your own perspective. And you also see a need for some of these little distinctions where, for instance, you talk about people being able to meditate during times of stress and when things aren't perfect and when there is noise going on and things like that. And so you identified, if this was helpful to you, it might be helpful for other people. Right? And so listening to that, trusting that you didn't have to go to school and get some certification. Yes, you had training, obviously, but I mean, it wasn't like you didn't wait to get a certain degree that said, okay, you got your doctorate, now you can go write a book on something. Yeah. So a couple great things that I got from your story that hopefully anyone listening to this, whether you've written a book or you haven't written a book, you can think about this and how this, because I want to emphasize now this next point. Are you open to sharing, could be an approximate number or some of the results that you've achieved now as an author, maybe about books sold, number of books sold, or anything like that?
Yeah, I actually don't know off the top of my head, but I would guess, just based off of the last time I did look and the steady sales that I see, the Unbound Soul probably sold about 50,000 copies, I would guess.
Yeah. Wow.
I haven't even looked at Experience or the Psychedelic Path, but what I can say is like the Warrior's Meditation. I honestly haven't, it's a strange thing. I spend my time doing that which is productive, and I don't spend a lot of time looking at the sales. As long as I have enough money to publish my next book or keep moving forward. I'm going to find a way. It's like I'm a fish just swimming up the river, and I don't care how thin the pathway is. I'm going to find a way to squeeze my way through. And so I look at things very simply. What is helpful in this moment? That's it. It's very, very simple. What is helpful? What is not? And I'll gravitate to what is most helpful. And so I could spend my time, I guess stroking myself for sales or whatever, but I just generally don't. However, I have been watching the Warriors Meditation recently because it's kind of giving me feedback, I believe, where the public's mindset is right now. So each day I check to see what's going on. And you could see this pattern after the COVID-19 thing. It's just going up and up and up. It's not a fully happy news there, but there is always a silver lining in every situation. So people are now at home and they're starting to think, how can I make the use of this time? So that's a great thing. There's an awakening aspect to any kind of suffering, to any kind of limitation. There's an opportunity found there as well. But to go referring to the Warriors Meditation, I suppose it's selling maybe 150 copies a day now or something like that. And it's been doing, that for some time now. It's growing. I'm just like, if I were given an average. So I suspect by the end of this year, assuming the momentum continues, it may surpass the Unbound Soul, which has been out for 4 years. So.
Yeah, well, great work, and congratulations on all your success. Because
thank you.
I want to really emphasize for you listening, like, you, Richard, you didn't go to a school for marketing, book marketing.
No,
right?
Well, aside from your school.
Yeah. Aside from the training, that I offered, I'm happy to hear it was helpful. It wasn't like you didn't get a degree in writing, as far as I know.
No,
right?
Far from it.
So this is, I want to really make this a point, because it's one thing to hear about another author and be like, oh, they were successful, good for them, great, whatever. But what I find especially inspiring is the mindset that you've taken in your approach to this. And I sense a lot of it's probably from the martial arts background and being able to,
very much.
Yeah. And what would you say, if you could touch on that for a moment, what from your martial arts training do you think, and in philosophy, do you think has helped you as an author?
One of the things as you know, especially maybe when you first walk into your jiu-jitsu dojo, for example, and I don't know who you first sparred with or whatever, and you're a strong guy, and you might think that you're going to do well, and they give you someone who's half your body weight, soaking wet, who just wipes the floor with you, and you find out you can't do anything, right? That's one of the things that's so beautiful about when we enter into a dojo where there's a capable instructor, is it just completely wipes the hard drive clear. You're like, okay, all that weightlifting I did, or all that whatever I did before, it really didn't amount to much because I'm getting beat up by this teenage girl, whatever, right? So, but at first there's this feeling like, well, there's a Mount Everest of skill in front of you that you have no idea how to navigate, right? That person who is much smaller than you, you're looking at them and it's almost like they're godlike to you in that moment, right? And how long is it going to take you to get to that point? And then you practice 6 months in, the person who's coming into the dojo who's new thinks of you that way, right? But you're still a neophyte compared to someone who's been practicing for 5 years or 10 years. And it's kind of like that. What I found in my dojo was that most people quit after 3 to 6 months. And if you really watch them and you listen to them, what's happening is they've got this inner narrative: this is impossible. I will never master this. I can never be good at this. It's just, I can't. It's this repeating thing that they believe. And what I had realized is that narrative isn't me. It's just an opinion. I don't care if it's an opinion in someone else's, coming out of someone else's mouth, or an opinion in this head. It's just an opinion. And it comes from ignorance. I honestly don't know my potential, right? So I just want to find out. I don't care what the opinion is. So every time there was a thought that I'm wasting my time, I could spend the next 30 years of my life doing this and not get anywhere, all of that, I'm like, I don't know. Because basically I just went back to ignorance. I don't know. I'm just going, this is interesting. I'm just going to keep plodding forward. And then at some point I was given the master's license and told I need to teach. So I think that's the most fundamental. I don't think I was particularly talented. I think that's the most fundamental attitudinal point is just, you just keep moving forward. If you stop and you really start thinking about these thoughts, you've just paralyzed yourself. It's much better to just move forward with, okay, what am I interested in right now? What do I need to do right now? What's helpful right now? And just keep moving forward. Don't give the devil his playtime, so to speak, or else it'll consume you,
Yeah.
And so I never gave myself an excuse. I went to the dojo every day. I mean, if whatever you want to do, so if you're a writer, this is one of the things that I find a lot of writers have trouble with, is they sit down at their computer and they think, what do I write? Nothing comes to mind. And they might sit there for 15 minutes. They get frustrated, then they click YouTube and they start watching a video and pretty soon the whole day's gone, right? Instead, it doesn't matter if you don't know what to write. Just open up your manuscript and start scrolling through it and see where your eyes stop. And then pretty soon stuff will start coming out. Right. Now that works very well for nonfiction, where you might not be writing in a particular order. I don't know how that would work for fiction because I've never written fiction, but I don't write in order in a nonfiction thing. I'm just, okay, this content feels right to put in this book, and I start writing the content, that chapter, another chapter, and it's all over the place at first. Then later on, it starts to find its position, so to speak. But if I just let my eyes scan over without thinking, I'm reading, pretty soon there's this little editing going on, and pretty soon, that needs more expansion on that story or whatever. Pretty soon you're writing. And you look at the clock and 5 hours have passed. You got 5 hours of writing. You're dehydrated and you need to go get a break, take a run, whatever, come back and do the same thing. You might find that you get a lot more writing than you would if you thought about it too much. Just go to the damn dojo. Open your software and start reading it. And you'll find more often than not that you start taking action. And so to go to the dojo, for example, I always took my dogi with me. For those people who don't know, uniform. I took my uniform. I'd have my bag. I would never leave it at home. And I would get on the train. And once you're on the train, it's like you're going to go. No matter how bad you feel, if you get in the car with your bag, you got enough momentum that you're going to make it to, your music teacher's place or whatever it is you want to study. You just got to get your bag and get out the door. Get some initial momentum. The rest of it is easy. What I found, don't take this advice if you got, the flu or COVID-19 or whatever, but if I was just feeling heavy or tired or ornery or stressed or whatever, I found that the mind's going to say, I don't want to go to the dojo. I just want to go home and go to sleep or rest or whatever. I found if I went to the dojo anyway, assuming I wasn't sick, that I felt so much better. Once I got there, I just felt so much better. And it was like this curse was lifted off of me, and I'm so thankful. And it's almost always I learn the most on days like that. Right. And so part of it is just that people get paralyzed by thinking too much. And there's some very basic, I like that you teach, you have your book on habits. I like that you teach some fundamental healthy habit forming possibilities for people. There's some really basic things that people, if they had in their toolkit, their life would improve dramatically. And one of them is just pick up your damn bag and get out the door. don't think beyond that. Keep it simple. Keep it simple.
Yeah, and that's exactly what the whole idea of Can I Just is. You find the smallest thing because momentum generates motivation. Exactly like you're saying. I don't feel like training today. I don't feel like writing today. But once you get into it, once you get into momentum, then it just, like you said, 5 hours can pass or an hour could pass or 20 minutes, doesn't matter. But you're now into it. You've gotten that momentum. And so it's like, what is that, just get on the train moment? What is that? Just grab the bag and get out the door. Because once you're out the door, it might be kind of awkward to have to go back in and set your bag back. And it's like, okay, I'm already walking. I already got my bag. I'm already on the train. And so finding those things that get you in motion, as you say, like, the 15 minutes, like I'm sitting there, I don't have anything to write. writing, the technique I've heard, you just write anything. You can scan for inspiration. I think that's great. Write about how it's hard to write. Write about how, I can't think of anything. This seems kind of silly. I really get stuck. Maybe I wonder what's going on with me, blah, 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 blah. But at least now you're writing about it.
That's right. You got some momentum. And the subconscious mind can start to pick up momentum, and pretty soon, boom, it's flowing.
Yeah. And I also love what you said about talking about how a lot of people quit after 3 to 6 months, which I think is probably going to be the case for just about anything. And you mentioned, this, I can't. And a quote that I've heard is, don't believe everything you think.
Mm-hmm.
The idea being your mind is telling you things, but it's like, just like you said, it's not just because it's coming from your mind doesn't mean it's true. And you bring up this a bit of a paradoxical thing, in that a lot of times we might think the key to success is you just got to be really certain, and you really just got to believe in yourself. Well, actually, sometimes the uncertainty.
I think that's not true. Yeah.
Yeah. Having that a degree of uncertainty of, I don't know. I'm just curious. None of us truly know. Even speaking about COVID-19, the truth is, it's all uncertain, right? Like, which is could be terrifying, but it can also be
beautiful, though. Life's an experiment. Find out what your capacities are.
Yeah. And that I'm so glad you used the word experiment, because that's exactly what it is. It's like, one thing I find helpful is I go, it's just like an experiment. I'm like a researcher. I get to discover something. I wonder, is this book promotion thing going to work? And I could sit there and be like, maybe it will, maybe it won't. But then I go, well, I get to find out. Now it's fun. It's like I'm a researcher who's figuring something out. And now all of a sudden it's a game. It's fun. If it didn't work, I go, oh, I found out what didn't work. Oh, that's cool. That's a discovery. Oh, I found out what did work. That's cool.
And you might isolate why that particular thing didn't work and why this particular thing does work. And there might be issues that are not related to the form, but to the timing and to other areas. But you can't go wrong with the experimentation. Well, you can, as long as you don't take it personally. You're going to learn from it.
Yeah, and just like you're saying, like you're saying, you experiment and you find out something didn't work, and then you get to experiment and go, well, why didn't it work? Is it just me? Is it just the timing? If I try a different timing, if I try this and that, some people it could be overwhelming. But for me, I'm like, this is part of the adventure. It's like, ooh, let's have fun figuring this all out.
One of the things that you talked about in your course, I don't remember the name of the course right now. I'm sorry. I wonder if you can, your audience probably knows.
The one on ads and the.
So it's AMS ads and you talk about more than that. You also talk about book, like the book description, cover, and things like that. But,
So that was the Inner Circle program, because you came on the calls. Yeah.
Yes. One of the things that I really liked about you stressed that there are these 4 or 5 areas that you could have 4 of these 5 areas really great, but if one of them is lacking, your sales are not going to be there. So it's a refinement process. And so I think a lot of people just they're not, I think our school system doesn't teach people to refine their learning process very well through experimentation. We're typically, maybe now that things have changed, I don't know, but when I grew up, they were everything was taught as, inform. You don't really learn the principle. You're not encouraged to experiment, to find your own way to solve the problem, that sort of thing. And that arrests the intelligence of the individual, right? And I think for a human being to reach their true fruition, to kind of maximize their expression in the world as a human being, that's probably true of any animal, you need the exploration. You've got to, create some of your own paths. Just always following the beaten path is, it's not very inspiring. And you can only go down that beaten path so many times and have it successful. Because once it becomes, if everybody follows the exact same principle, it's just noise. They're all on equal footing. It's not till somebody kind of breaks off that path and finds an unexpected gold mine in a direction that no one thought to go that something new is born, right? Most of the books that people will remember 100 years from now or 50 years from now, they're not the ones that just sold really well early on. They're the ones that hit some vital point really touched something deep within human beings. And that was a lasting power, right? You know, a lot of books that probably sell real well, but no one will remember what they are 20 years from now. And I suspect that a lot of people have something in them that's not in that beaten path. And it might be a small, seemingly small adjustment to something that's already out there. But sometimes, 2 inches is effectively experientially universes apart. I mean, you know that from jiu-jitsu. The difference between success and failure is tiny.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, especially for nonfiction authors who think, well, there's nothing new under the sun. What do I have to say that's any different? So on and so forth, things that I struggled with. And like you're saying, what helped me is realizing, well, wait a second, I've heard people make the slightest distinction and it gave me a breakthrough. I've heard people talk about, maybe I've heard the general concept 100 times, but someone says it just in their voice, or they have their story that they attach to it, or something. Maybe it's just the timing that I heard it from that person, where I was at in my life, and then it finally clicked. And I go, well, what if they would have said, oh, well, this is nothing new. People have talked about this for thousands of years. Well, it doesn't matter. It's like you still need it, and people might need to hear your message delivered from you in your voice with your slight little nuance, or your story, which no one's going to have the exact same story that you have. You have your life experiences, your unique combinations of things, and all it might be is that 2-inch little difference. But that could be, if that's the difference between someone not getting it and someone having a breakthrough and it changing their life, well, that's all the difference, right? That's all that matters.
That when you're talking about that subtle difference there's 2 words that came to mind, which a slight word choice change in my books from typical books on meditation. It's commonly taught to surrender, to surrender, to surrender. I don't use that word because people have a negative unconscious association with it. It's weakness. It's a loss. It's that sort of thing. And so they usually are not able to surrender, even though they're hearing the word. They may even like the sound of the word consciously, but unconsciously, all those other associations are there, right? And so they're really not able to relax into the situation. So I just changed it to soften. That one little thing, I've gotten so many people send me an email about just the word choice of soften. So, for example, if something's causing you to become anxious, soften the inner space, right? Don't surrender, because you're not going to be able to. It's like someone throwing you into the deep end of the pool and saying, relax. If you've never swum before, you're just not going to be able to do it. I said, relax, relax. You can yell at them all you want, but they're not going to be able to do it. And part of the deep end of the pool is their subconscious mind in this case. And all the associations with what surrender means. Getting bullied and cowering in the corner essentially is what most people's subconscious narrative is with association of that word. So, subtle changes like that can help people have tremendous breakthroughs.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up. And I mean, the nonfiction author in me, you could go really deep on that. I'll just say that even for fiction authors, the slight word choices can, this is equally applicable. Any sort of writing, any sort of communication. When you talk about that though, redefining a term, that is, you see it all over marketing. You see it all over the nonfiction world, all over the teaching world, this idea of redefining for exactly the reason you brought up. People have preconceived notions. Words are loaded with emotion, which can be a double-edged sword in the way that someone interprets surrender one way, if it's a negative way, or if it interferes negative, not, maybe it's hard to say if it's positive or negative, but for them, it doesn't serve them in that moment.
Doesn't serve, that's good.
And which is, quick redefinition, right? So it's like, how can you adjust your language, or be a teacher and you provide this? So there's so many opportunities where you can look and you can say surrender might be a great word for some people, but not others. What's a way that I can help the people who that's not serving, who that's not helping? And now all of a sudden you can enter in the place and you can be saying a lot of same things that other people are saying on a higher kind of principle level, but the way that you've packaged it now can make all the difference. And I know for me doing
the conveyance is essential. Yeah.
there's just the emotional impact that something can have. And I love that soften, because I think in martial arts, like if I'm getting choked out, I'm not going to surrender. You know, they're about to choke me. I'm going to keep going for it. But I also know if I tense up, that actually makes it harder. So there's
that
this sort of
sinks it
like
in deeper. Yep.
almost like I'm relaxed. I'm okay. I got a little bit of a finger in here. Okay, I can keep breathing. And it's almost a meditative sort of thing. Like I'm totally relaxed in this moment, but I'm not so relaxed that they're going to be able to take it over. But there is a certain, this is the hard thing. If you haven't done martial arts, yeah, it's the yin yang. Like, okay, I have to stay in this, but I can't freak out and stuff. And that's why, you know, I mean, I won't go too much into this, but anyone, you know, if you're listening to this, I know obviously not everyone is in a physical condition to do martial art, and the time that we're at currently recording this, not everyone can do martial arts. I find that whether it's martial art, maybe it's, maybe there's some translation with music practice. I have to think about that, playing an instrument. You know, I find that having these different skills, we can learn lessons from them that we translate over. There's so many things I learned from martial arts that help me as a writer and as a person, and vice versa. It all translates over. And that's why what I love about you sharing your experience, Richard, is that like we can find these principles in anyone's story, anyone's experience. What someone learned about, you know, whatever your background is, this is where I want to go with this. Whatever your background is, for me, I was a musician. I go, what did I learn about music that helps me now as a writer? What did you learn from martial arts that can help me as a writer? What did you learn as a school teacher that can help you as a writer? What did you learn being a nurse that could help? Like, look, you know, we all have our background. And if you go, wait a second, I'm getting into writing, I'm getting into this marketing thing, it all seems new. It seems like this totally foreign concept. What if there's actually a lot of lessons you have from your life up to this point, that if you find the principles that have already served you, what have you already done well? And how can you apply those principles to what you're doing right now?
Yeah. You know, it's so interesting. People dismiss their experience or undervalue their experience, but I think they haven't realized that that's the only experience that they ever can have. You cannot have somebody else's experience. The entire universe, as far as you are concerned, is your experience. Your mind doesn't stop just with your noggin, but everything that you ever see, that your senses ever touch, is somewhere in there. You know what I mean? It's somewhere in there. And so you are like an expression of the universe unfolding, would be like a spiritual way of saying it, but it's actually very practical. There is so much depth to each individual's experience. Whether or not they see that depth is the question. And writing is a great way to start mining the depths. I tell people again and again, you got meditation. It's a great tool to enrich your life, to become more aware of the motivations and the energies and the unseen inspiration that's lurking under the surface. But you've also got the notepad. You know, this is something that, you know, I carry around these little memo pads, little staples, you know, memo pads. I guess you can get them anywhere. And I'm just constantly taking notes. And I'll do it. I recommend this to people all the time, people at my seminars, and almost never do people do it. People get these. Keep a little pencil in your pocket or a pen in your pocket. One of these fits in your pocket, so you got no excuse. When inspiration comes, you just write down a few words so you remember it later. Because if you don't, you'll think you'll remember, but you won't. Chances are you've lost something. If you haven't written it down pretty quickly, you'll get consumed by your day and it's gone. You just write it down, you know. And this thing is, you know, amazing tool. So simple, like $1.50 or whatever, you know. And you'll have content forever if you just did that. And later on, when you read through it, you got a couple of keywords. It only takes a second. You write a couple of keywords, and you know that you'll remember that when you look later. And then you go home, you open it up, and you start writing more content based on those keywords. And I think it's very easy to write if you do stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, when I kept track of ideas, started making that a regular habit. I mean, there's I'd be willing to bet it's probably over 100 pages at this point of just my idea dump
Oh,
document
yeah.
of like dumping everything. And the idea isn't that I have to go through and use it all, but like you're saying, you have it and you can skim through it. You can see, what inspires me today. Where do my eyes stop, and why is this calling to me today, and going from there. So
and you may look at it 3 years later, and stuff that didn't fit with you at the time when you re-looked at it might start to fit for another book, or it may never. But in any case, you've unlocked the psychological constipation, the idea constipation. That's what we've got to do, is just get some diarrhea going, right? And let the ideas flow. Yeah.
So
one of the things I noticed that so many authors do, and I definitely felt this when I first published my book, the Unbound Soul, is when you publish a book, you're really putting yourself out there. You're going to get reviews from people, assuming that anybody ever reads it. Now, the safest thing is to publish it. If you're worried about people's opinions, no one will ever read it, and then you don't have to think about it again. Surprisingly, there's a lot of authors, well, they're not really authors until they publish, but a lot of writers where that's their condition. They actually don't want people to read it. They would like to become writers. They want everybody to give them 5 stars or never read it, right? And so I've actually had a lot of people contact me and ask me about that. And I have to sympathize with them. When I put my book in for publishing, for editing, I was super nervous just to have the editor read it. I mean, just really, really nervous about it. But I didn't, ultimately, it had to be done, So, okay, no matter how nervous, it's like before you go into a jiu-jitsu match or get into a fight, you gotta be scared. You're gonna be nervous. It's all right. You just go anyway. You just go anyway. And once people start doing that, it's very liberating, because you start to become a leader of your subconscious mind. Your body unifies, and it stops being this antagonistic force with your intentions, and you stop worrying about opinions so much. And you just start flowing towards, it's like this virtual cycle that begins, and you start flowing towards what's more useful, right? And away from all the urges and compulsions and stuff like that. It's really powerful. So just publish a damn thing and expect that you're going to get some 1 stars. That's all right. Read every one of them. You might, some of the best stuff I learned is from my bad reviews. People will write some pretty harsh things, but I'm like, okay, yeah, I see where maybe he misunderstood that passage, but it probably could have been written better, and I might have not had this useless review or this person upset me if I just reworded it a bit differently, because everybody's going to interpret things a little bit different. But you can always improve the way you interpret things, or the way you write. And there are some ways of saying something which are much more prone to be misunderstood than others, right? So,
yeah, that's some great advice in the sense of, if a person's worried about other people's opinions, and that's definitely, first of all, it's called being human. If you're considering other people's opinion of you, we're hardwired, right? We're tribal creatures, and that
social creatures.
We want to be approved of, accepted, and so on and so forth. So first of all, know that that's totally normal. The other thing is, I ask myself, do I want to let people's opinion have power over me?
That's
and
the question.
When I phrase it like that, I'm like, no, I don't want to let this person cause me to hold back on my gifts, or especially when it comes to critics, do I want to withhold something that could really help people because someone else might not, care for it? It's not their thing, but there's someone else who would love it. So am I going to take it? Am I going to rob the person who would really benefit from this book because there might be someone else who doesn't? And then you bring up, I also see this became more and more clear to me over the last several years, that writing and publishing a book can be one of the ultimate forms of personal development. Right?
Oh, yeah.
You're gonna face all these things that we're talking about. Right? It's an experience, and if worrying about other people's opinion has been a challenge, and again, it has been for me in the past, and still occasionally shows up, like, great. Oh, I'm worried about what people are going to think when they read the book. Well, that's all the more reason to put it out there. That's all the more reason to get the 1-star review. And I remember, not that you try to get it, but to accept it when it comes, if it comes, because that first 1-star review I got, it was on my 3rd book, and it came in, I'm like, maybe this is like a competitor who's just trying to knock my book down because it's selling well. And like, I'm pretty sure I lost a little sleep over that 1-star review and the anxiety and the tension. And then it happened. But now it's like, oh, I got a 1-star. Now I actually sometimes look for 1-star reviews that I can put in an email and like joke about it or be like, yeah, you know, this person complained because the book, you know, just was too short. And you know what? It is, you know, it cuts right to the point. If you want an encyclopedia on this, this is not the book for you. But if you appreciate when someone cuts out all the fluff and gets right to the point, then you might like it. So I do like a little spin on it and be like, yeah, it's not for you if you think that. And
you reframe it, right?
Yeah. So, and there's so much to that. And like you said, sometimes the negative feedback, I get it. It still frustrates me when people are like, you clearly misunderstood that. And then I stop, I go, could I have been more clear about that? And that's a good question. Sometimes I'm like, I literally could not have been more clear. I don't know how this person, how in the world this just happened, an email I got.
Yeah, you're not going to get through to everybody.
I have my training audiobooks for every author. And he's like, and you're saying that every author can record their own audiobook. I'm like, no, I actually specifically in the training say that that's not the case. It's called that because I teach about how to get a narrator or do it yourself. But he was confusing the part where I'm talking about doing it yourself. I actually say, well, this isn't for everyone. Some people should hire a narrator. But anyway, I'm like, I say multiple times that doing it yourself isn't the approach I recommend for everyone. But still, some people interpret it like that. And all I got to do is sit back and go, okay, maybe some people are just, you know, have that. And then I also go, but could I have been more clear? How can I say it next time to make that distinction more clear? So some people just aren't going to get it. And then sometimes, like you're saying, you can go, okay, there might be some lesson in here, including repelling people who aren't the right readers and being more upfront in the description.
I very much agree with that. I very much agree with that. Yeah, you do the best you can. Or I write my books that way now, doing the best I can intentionally to repel the wrong people. And I put the book description in there. I'm doing two things. One is I'm trying to gravitate the right people, and anybody who's not, you know, sort of 70% of that right, I'm like, okay, what can I do to get these guys out of here? You know, I don't know what the percentage is, but there's a point where I'm not trying to get every reader. You want to attract the right readers. And if you can really tune your books that way, tune your descriptions that way, tune your covers that way, you'll save everybody a lot of headaches. You don't want someone buying your book if they're not going to enjoy it anyway.
Yeah. Right. So as we start to wrap up, I want to finish on a couple practical tips and takeaways. So, you know, when it comes to, you know, you've done well with these book sales. What would you say, especially someone who's getting into it and they're like, well, I don't have much of an audience. I'm trying to get myself going as an author. You know, what are a few things that you've learned that you could share with other authors would help them? I think we covered some of the getting your book out there, but, you know, once it's out there, like, what do I do? How do I start getting sales? What are some tips?
So the first thing that I noticed is that, and are you familiar with Richard Bachman?
Sounds vaguely familiar, but I'm going to say no.
All right, so this is a very interesting experiment. So Richard Bachman is the pseudonym that Stephen King made for himself when he wanted to publish some books. He ran an experiment and wanted to find out if I wrote the same quality of books, the same types of stories, it's still Stephen King content, but he just slapped a different name on it. And so he published some books under the name Richard Bachman. And you might know the movie. There was a movie called The Running Man that came from one of those books. It was A Long Walk, Rage. There's a number of stories in there. I believe the story that became the movie Stand By Me was also under Richard Bachman. I mean, that was a great movie, a great story, great book. And they didn't sell at all. I mean, it was just nothing. And then his publisher, of course, said, hey, you know, we really, really need to change the name over to Stephen King. And they did, and it sold like hotcakes. So early on, the truth of the matter is there might not be anybody who's going to read your book right away. It might take a little while, and don't be too concerned about that point, but just keep clawing your way forward. As Derek, as you said earlier, Derek, that, you know, it's an experiment and you're going to try out a number of different marketing tools. You know, you may have to refine your cover a little bit. You may need to try AMS ads, and you may spend some money and lose some money, but it's an investment. If you think of it all as an investment, it's an investment certainly at an educational level. You're learning in this process. It's also an investment so that you can share your content with the world. That's another investment, and also an investment in that it might financially pay itself back, hopefully, at some point. But if you don't go through that experimentation, if you always just stick to the beaten path, it's unlikely that an author with no name is going to claw their way up and eventually have a name. And it could take years. It could take years. But again, it's sort of the same with the martial arts principle. It's I can't mentality. You're switching that to just soften the opinion, soften the feeling about the opinion, even if it continues happening. Just keep moving forward. And eventually you'll have some people read it. If it's good content, they'll tell somebody about it. And then I still remember where I was when I got my first book sale. That wasn't me. I bought my own book because I wanted to get it. By the way, if you publish, buy your own book so that it actually gets acknowledged by the Amazon algorithm, because it won't even have a ranking until somebody buys it. So just buy your own book, right? Buy your Kindle, buy your paperback. It'll be given a ranking. At least then somebody might be able to find it in the Amazon system. Or tell your mother to buy it or whatever. But I remember the first sale that I got. It was with my wife on a road trip, and I was checking with my phone, and I got a sale, and it was absolutely amazing. And it was after I joined your program, and I believe, my memory's not so clear, but I believe it was after I joined your program, and I figured out a little bit about AMS ads from your program. And I got my first sale, and then the next day I had another one, and a couple days later I got two, and then a couple days and nothing. Those are really depressing days. Once your book starts going up and then it starts dropping down, that can be really depressing. After a while, you just realize it doesn't say anything about you. None of it says anything about you. And that's liberating. Just move forward, do what's helpful. And if you spent all that time writing your book, invest in the cover, invest in the marketing, and make it something that if you want your reader to invest in it, well, geez, you better invest in it yourself and be willing to take a few years, because it might take that long. You're probably a lot of great authors who went unrecognized for many, many years, and suddenly, boom, they take off. You never know.
Yeah.
How many artists become famous after they die,
Yeah. And as much as I want to think that you can do things in you might look at someone and say like, oh, they were an overnight success, and maybe they did write a book and it was their first attempt at writing a book and it took off right away. I look at it like my first book, did it take me, or the book that became first book of mine that became a number one bestseller, I wrote in about a week. I launched it in about another week. And I say that, but then I'm like, did it take a week, or was it the fact that I was spending 2 years prior to that writing blog posts, writing another book that I took a lot of that content from and synthesized? But was it even 2 years? Was it the almost 10 years that I spent studying and immersing myself to even gain all that knowledge? Was it the 20 plus years that I had spent accumulating more life? So that's that whole thing. It's like it's
where did your story begin? And it's really the first breath you ever took, Nobody's an instant success. It all builds from your first breath in this world.
Yeah.
So,
well, I appreciate you, Richard, sharing your story, sharing your insights. And I'm going to recommend, I'll include some links. I'm going to recommend, especially if I'll let you share a bit about your books and what you would say, but it's the newest one, the Warrior's Meditation, that could be particularly helpful for those at any point in time in life, and especially now as things are, people are looking for being more grounded, having more time at home, and this is the catalyst that gets a person into meditation, then that's at least some good that can come out of the situation. And then also your book, The Unbound Soul. I would say, I didn't even think about this before we did this interview. If you're considering writing a memoir or working on a memoir, that's a book that you'd want to check out, just to understand and see how you've positioned the book, how you've created the cover, how so much of that you can learn from that. And so, Richard, how can people learn more about you and your work?
So you can go to my website, www.richardlhaight.com, Haight, Haight.com, and it's all there. I've got a YouTube channel, Tools of Spiritual Awakening. If people are interested in sort of spirituality and meditation, they might find that helpful. But I would, if I were to say that there was any book that maybe people might find useful, regardless of their background, if they're interested in awareness, if they're interested in improving the quality of their life, the Warrior's Meditation, you kind of can't go wrong with it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Richard.
Thank you, Derek. Have a great day.